So this is Jake and I's presentation on the first question of iRobot. The big idea, 2.0, was that the original laws were not designed to work. They were kind of like a temporary patch for what was happening. That's why there wasn't really a fourth law, because if they just kept adding more, they would keep adding problems.
Okay, so I'll read out the first law, then I'll kind of go through an explanation of what we think about it. So, a robot must not injure a human, or through an action, allow a human to come to harm. So, essentially, our whole idea, and pretty much the big idea, as Quinn just said, is that you have to draw a line of ethics to define the words human and harm. Well, how would you define a human? Well, you could say like a living person, right? Well, I mean, would you call a dead person a human? Would they not be able to harm a dead person? Would they not be able to harm, say, there's obviously some ethical controversies going on in society today where people have, like, they're debating whether this is a human, this is not a human yet, and harm. So, what does it mean? We'll go more into that on the second law, but essentially, like, what does it mean to harm a human? If I, like, tell my robot, go destroy that person's table, I mean, you're not harming the human, but by inaction, you are harming the human, right? Because they're going to be like, oh, you destroyed my table, what's that for? So there's obviously some certain barriers that we have to kind of breach, and whoever's programming it, has to define these two terms. Right, okay. So, in application to obviously our society, we have two things that are kind of basically redefined or are constantly discussed. So trials are pretty much just the review of law and if it applies to a case. This really, really applies to the first law in the sense that we have to decide whether this is the correct application of this law to this exact scenario. If it isn't, well, then the case gets thrown out and whoever's being accused gets let off. If it does apply and the person who did something bad goes against the laws set in place, then they get in trouble and in turn get put in jail. The Ninth Amendment. So the Ninth Amendment just basically implies that all the rights to a human that are not listed in the Constitution should still be followed. That is very interpretive. We got to decide, well, what laws are these? If they're not just put down statically on paper, what are these laws? So you got to kind of decide and make an ethical standpoint on what these laws that humans need to follow are, or what rights are guaranteed to them. Alright, so this is the second law. Once again, I'll read it out. A robot must obey the orders given to it by a human being, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. So, I'll relate this to Law 1-2 with QT on page 34 to 35 on iRobot. So, essentially what QT does there is he kind of redefines what human master means, because he starts believing that this robot right here, he's obviously my master, since humans aren't like more powerful than me in a physical way and most likely a mental way. So he thinks that the robot, or I think it's like a little machine kind of thing, must be his superior since he is superior to him. So once again, well, that's essentially it. So if we apply this to our society, so social laws are implanted in human brain. So we kind of know you don't make fun of your boss because your boss can fire you. He obviously has authority over you, which makes sense because you just kind of know that by instinct, right? But a robot wouldn't know about that by instinct because it needs to be programmed. It can only follow the laws in such way that they're programmed because that's how a robot works. It's static. It doesn't change. It has to follow exactly what the programming tells it to follow. So also government systems bodies, what we form. And we establish order in ideology, so that's kind of similar to a robot in the sense that we're just following what laws are put in place and how the governments are formed to regulate us.
Alright, so the third law is that a robot must protect its own existence as long as that protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And we were wondering, how does a robot draw conclusions as to whether it conflicts with the first or second law? Because relating to the first law, how do you define a human, or how do you define hurt to a robot? And it's just something that's really hard to program into it. The third law applied is very much like the God-given right of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, only that robots don't pursue happiness. a human has a desire to live instead of a desire to exist. And this is kind of like when Speedy, in Chapter 2, he was sent to go get selenium from the selenium pools, but the danger was so high that third law took action and pushed him away from the selenium pools so that he would not injure himself.
Alright, so, well, here's the thing with the fourth law. So, part of the assignment was to add a fourth law, right? Well, if we learned anything from the book, is that these laws absolutely do not work. That's the whole point of the book. These laws, they don't work. That's what the book is. All these chapters are just scenarios where the laws go wrong. So, my belief and Quinn's belief is that the whole point of this book was for Asimov to prove a fallacy, or a fallacy being, against logic and fighting it, or not against logic and fighting it, some reasoning that goes against logic. So that fallacy in this case was be one size fits all. So these laws, they're supposed to regulate the entirety of a robot's life, everything they're supposed to do. They're supposed to not hurt humans, they're supposed to protect themselves, they're supposed to follow the humans' orders, but they don't work. We just know that by reading the book. They don't work. So the whole point of the book is just to prove that adding another law, or us adding another law, won't do anything at all, because there's obviously going to be issues with it, because just adding a law doesn't do anything. There's going to be issues with it. So a misconception, we can say, what people believe the book's idea is to prove, Isaac Asimov put down these safeguards to stop robots. This is his idea, that these safeguards will prevent robots from hurting humans, when in actuality that's not what the book was meant to be. It's supposed to show you that these laws, no matter what, applied to robots won't do anything, because we're taking a standpoint on ethics, and a robot can only follow exactly what the program says. And if we basically tell it exactly what to do, then there's no interpretation which a normal human would be able to distinguish using social laws and knowing what authority is, if that makes sense. And so one size fit all is a fallacy based on our findings. So that's essentially it. So there is no fourth. We don't want to add a fourth law because it's just going to end up the same thing as the first, second, and third law. That's it.
Thank you.